So today we have our TDS guests from the US of A. And why are we talking about USA is because we have our ICAN, the International Conference for Autism and Neurodevelopmental Disorders, happening in the US of A, which is going to be happening on the 17th and the 18th of April 2025 at the Omni Resort, ChampionsGate. And believe me, it's going to be an amazing experience because the theme of ICAN this time is Voices of Autism, personal journeys, professional insights. So you will hear from the individuals on the spectrum themselves. Who else can narrate their stories better than them? Next will be parents who will be sharing in their experiences, and definitely our professionals and doctors as well. What a combination is that going to be? Isn't it exciting, guys? So I am definitely waiting for this particular event, which is the ICAN. And one more exciting thing that I would love to share with y'all. Dr. Temple Grandin, who herself is on the spectrum, an author, a speaker, and an autism rights activist. We already know her. She is going to be present with us in person. Yes. And also to join us along is going to be Matt Morgan, who is a former WWE wrestler, and he is a father of a child on the spectrum. And we have Thomas Island, who is going to be our end keynote speaker. Amazingly exciting stuff coming up your way, everyone. Stay tuned for more information. And yes, don't forget to register. The registration link you will definitely find there in our description. So do not forget to register and be a part of this exciting conference. So now let's tune in back to our TDS. Navigating autism together, one story at a time. So, yes, welcome to the Dolly Show, both of you. This is what makes the Dolly Show unique. So, we have a professional who is Michelle with us, and she is an ABA therapist, and we have our parent who is Brittany, and she's a mother of 3 wonderful children, out of which 2 are on the spectrum.
Yes.
So I welcome both of you to the Dolly Show. Thank you so much for coming in, and a lot of things that we're going to discuss today, and it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great. So my first question to both of you, yes, first to you, Michelle, would be, what led you into the autism world, and how has your journey started, and how has it been?
Yeah, no, I love this question. It's very important to me. I became a mom 12 years ago. And so at that time, I really didn't know what I even wanted to do. Where was my career? I went back to school at that time and started seeking out a bachelor's in psychology. Of course, at that time, there was exposure to so many different branches of psychology, and a professor of mine was a behavior analyst, and the way in which she taught was so different than anything I had ever experienced. She individualized her approach, and it really intrigued me. So I owe kind of my success to her, because she's the one who introduced me to the science of applied behavior analysis. Add that in with being a parent, I learned that parenting is very individualized. Being a parent and a professional I've been able to merge both of those things into being able to gently parent my own child, individualize my approach as a parent, which led me to wanting to share that style of parenting with other children and other parents. So I started out my journey with just being a little student analyst in a little private school for kids with children with autism. That was in, I want to say, 2017, wow. About 7 years ago, maybe. So I started my journey out there in the school and was taking a master's program, which is where I learned all about autism, applied behavior analysis, and have been in the field ever since.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Such an inspiration. And yes, I agree. When you do get into all of these, deep knowledge, you yourself become a better parent, a better person, I would say, because we as well, when I talk to parents and professionals now, I think even me, I'm going wrong somewhere, and I'm able to correct myself, my parenting skills as well. So
Yes.
it's a big thank you to y'all.
Yes.
That I am also, developing as an individual and as a parent. Yes, Brittany, ma'am, over to you.
Yes.
Your journey is also going to be very inspiring. So yes, we want to hear it from you, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm a mother to 3 children who have autism. All 3 are different in their own ways. My oldest daughter, she's about to be 11 in 2 weeks. So she is my verbal child. She's able to do things on her own. She actually helps me around the house a whole lot, even with her brothers. I'm thankful for her. My 2 boys, they are 8 and 6. They're both nonverbal. So with them being nonverbal, it gave us the opportunity to learn sign language and use it many different ways around the house. When they first started ABA, they were introduced to something with the PECS book where they use pictures to identify. So we use that a lot around the house. Thankfully, Miss Michelle right here helped with that a lot. And then my youngest, Rashad, he's my youngest. He's 6. He has EOE.
EOE.
He has EOE. It's a rare condition that affects his esophagus cord. So it's like asthma, to where he struggles with eating. He was in feeding therapy. When my daughter was young, when she was about 18 months, I started noticing a lot of delayed milestones in her development. So I took her to the pediatrician. They referred her out to neurology where they did further testing. That's whenever we realized that she had autism. She started in speech and occupational therapy at the time, and then she went into school. I didn't start ABA therapy until I had my son, my second child. At that point, I already knew some autism signs in him as well. So I brought it up to the pediatrician. And then that's whenever I first was introduced to ABA. The neurologist was like, we're going to, refer him to speech, occupational, and ABA. At that time, I didn't know what ABA was. It took me a while to put him in ABA because I heard so many mixed reviews about ABA. Okay. So it was scary at the time. He didn't start ABA until I think he was about 3. He was about 3, and that was back in 2020. He started ABA in Bloom in Winter Park, and that helped him a lot. He was there for about 4 years. In 2018, I had my 3rd son, and when I noticed signs of autism a whole lot earlier because at that point I had 2 children already with autism. So I was already on it. He started ABA pretty much like right when he was about 18 months at Bloom as well. And ABA with Bloom has helped them both to where they are today. They still receive ABA, but now they're receiving ABA in school. So it's been a lot, but it's been great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yes, it's been a roller coaster, but yes, the journey has been not so easy.
Yes.
But yes, you have gone through it.
Yes.
And you've come out in a much better way, which is very inspiring.
Thank you.
Fabulous. So let's come back to you, Michelle. ABA. Lot of myths, lot of, as Brittany as well said.
Yeah.
People are a little reluctant because whatever, the word has been going around.
Sure.
So nobody better than you can explain how ABA works beautifully for children.
Yeah. No, for sure. And, the parents that have concerns about ABA are not wrong in their hesitancies. ABA is a newer therapy where we are still daily annually learning so much. Thank you to parents and their children for participating, so that we can continue to learn and grow. Many years ago, when the science first was developed, B.F. Skinner was such an important part of creating this science for us. There wasn't a lot of compassion for the child at the time. Autistic people were not looked at like they were anything other than maybe just something that needed to be researched. Whereas now we realize that autism is just something that we have to adapt our approach to accommodate them, to make our world a better place for them versus making them a better place for the world. ABA therapy is a newer therapy. It's a newer science, and there is still so much to learn. But what we have adjusted to is the understanding that people with autism are not just something that we need to figure out. What we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how can we teach in a way in which they can learn in the way in which they need to learn. So it's an individualized approach. And by individualizing the approach, what we're doing is we're thinking about what is the best way they can receive information. By doing so, we're always keeping the client first. So the concern over the years, many years ago, was always that we were trying to use a therapy to restrain children, because a big barrier to children with autism when it comes to learning and acquiring new information is that they engage in some really challenging behaviors. Those can be self-injurious. They could be harming their caregivers. And most of those behaviors are coming out because they have not yet learned how to communicate. So what was happening many years ago when the science and the therapy first began was that they were being restrained or punished a lot for those behaviors. Unfortunately, a lot of parents were very hesitant to participate, of course, as they should have been. But over the years, we have adjusted our approach to learn that these behaviors were not because they were doing something wrong. They were just trying to communicate that what we were doing was not teaching them in the way in which they were receiving information. So that the way that we now approach therapy is all about understanding what is their maximum ability, what is the maximum that they can take from us. And we want to make sure that threshold is very clear. We're not pushing them to a point where we don't want those behaviors to be evoked. We want to teach them to a point that they don't need to engage in those behaviors, but we can teach them how to communicate before those behaviors occur. So our strategies are very much leaning towards more proactive strategies. How can we teach them to communicate that they need a break? How can we communicate to teach them that they need food, they need water, they need a toy, they need sensory input, they need different functions. And so by doing a very individualized approach, we've been able to lead with compassionate care, which is successful in teaching not only children with autism, but all humans.
Wow.
Yes.
So there's been a shift.
There has been quite a shift. Yes. Yes. The shift has been much more humanized, I would say. I mean, ABA was a science that was tested with pigeons, with dogs, the Pavlovian theory, things like that. And so we're much now more humanized with our approach instead of just thinking of science as just something we're testing. We are very much more compassionate with our therapy strategies and keeping that child or that human at the forefront of our interventions.
A huge myth that can be taken off with this statement that you're given right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It takes off that myths where people think, yes, it's when ABA comes into picture, it always is associated with a sort of a punishment or a reinforcement of, particular habit or a particular, So yet a big myth that can go off with this statement.
Yes.
Super. Over to you, ma'am. How has ABA helped you and your children?
It's helped a lot from just communication to listening skills to doing things around the house. It's helped a lot. Like with, for instance, learning the textbook, they learned that in ABA. My sons could communicate with pictures. They communicate by telling me what they need. Now they're at the age to where they could kind of go get it themselves, but they still go to their PECs, like pictures at home that we have on the refrigerator to identify what they want. They helped with just different things like holding hands, walking. Wow. I know my youngest son, he's holding my hand compared to what he was like years ago. He was struggling. That is something that he used to not want to do. He would drop to the floor. He wouldn't want to walk. With the help of his ABA therapy, with the RBTs and the BCBA, like he was able to actually walk and hold my hand and not drop to the floor. So that is something I'm grateful for, because I don't have to worry about picking him up off the ground to go into the store or to go to school or just walking around in the neighborhood, because he loves to go on walks, but he would drop to the ground. He would want to run off. He didn't want to hold my hand. Now he's holding my hand and not trying to run off. Wow. Mm-hmm. He's walking with me.
Fantastic.
So that is one of the major things, was the hand walking and the communication skills that he learned in ABA for both boys. I'm very thankful for.
Fabulous. Such a nice achievement. So can we just more elaborate on the sensory aspect of autism?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we were talking about the reasons that behaviors may occur, there are 4 common known functions of behavior. So that could be to access something, to escape something. It could be for attention, but a big part of autism is the sensory aspect. So when we're talking about sensory, we're talking about, just like we've learned many years ago about our senses. With autism, there is generally 1, maybe 2 different senses that are extreme heights. They're very heightened. One may be their vision. One could be their ears. When people first learn about autism, they often say, well, does your child cover their ears, or does your child flap their hands or spin or rock or, things like that, right? This is very common with autism. We have very different ways that feeling can be perceived in the body. Brittany has 2 children who engage in some very high sensory seeking behaviors. We've learned a lot about the sensory component.
It's all kinds.
Thanks. Yeah.
It's a lot, from covering the ears, the spinning, the flapping, the jumping. My youngest son right now, his thing is, it's spitting. It's gross. It's sensory input for him. And he's just spitting away. And it's just, there's so many unique and different ways. And each 3 of my kids have their own way of sensory needs. And I learned different ways with them, because like my middle child, my son, he has his headphones to cover his ears. And then my youngest son, right now, it's just mostly spinning and jumping and spinning.
Yes. So with that sensory component, it's important that you, as a provider, that we continuously coordinate care with other providers, specifically like with an occupational therapist. So the occupational therapist has taught us a lot about the vestibular system, which is that system that regulates your ability to regulate space, your ability to maintain balance and things like that, which is where that hand flapping or that spinning, they're looking for a type of pressure at times. They're looking for a certain feeling at times. Some kiddos are hypo and some are hypersensitive to sensory input. So as an ABA practitioner, it is very important to understand this, because when you are seeing a child who engages in some, what we would look as abnormal behaviors, you want to know why those behaviors are happening. What are they looking for? Do they need more? Do they need less sensory input? And what sensory input is that? Just like if you have an itch on your foot and you're trying to study for an exam, or you're in the middle of an exam, you're not going to be able to concentrate until that feeling is gone, and you've met that feeling. And so with a lot of our clients, we're trying to figure out, why are they having such a hard time right now? Why can't they seem to sit and engage with an activity, whether it be play or educational or any other skill? And a lot of that is because of that sensory input that they're lacking or getting too much of. It's very important as a provider that you understand the sensory component of an autistic person so that you know what needs to be met from that sensory side.
Wow, that's such an important information to know, because yes, if you take it in the wrong way, you might just end up in trouble for these children.
Well, for sure, because back many years ago, when our autistic human beings were engaging in these behaviors that appeared socially abnormal,
Yes.
What was happening? They were getting restrained. They were telling them their hands need to be staying in their lap or things like that. And then come to find out, we're taking away something that was so important to help them learn. Whereas it was actually a strength. It was just simply a way for, just like me talking with my hands. If you told me I had to sit in a certain way,
so uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah. And so it's very similar. Of course there are limitations, because if it is a danger, if it is a safety issue, then the importance is teaching an appropriate replacement behavior, but not taking it away. It's about proper replacement.
Wow.
Yeah.
Such an insight. Thank you so much for that.
Yes.
It was really important to address this. I would really love you to delve deep into ABA, and what all strategies do you use in ABA?
Yes. So the approach, the interventions are all extremely individualized. And I continue to use this word because that is all the concept of ABA is individualizing a therapeutic approach for every human being who is a recipient. So the process is quite simple. We start our process through an evaluation. We call that an assessment. And that assessment typically takes place with the parent, the child, a BCBA, and maybe an assistant, a therapist at the time. What we're doing during an assessment is we're determining strengths and we're determining weaknesses. We're determining where those gaps are developmentally, and we're determining what behavior challenges does this child have, and what approaches that we believe the interventions that we'll be using, which intervention would be most successful based on the function of this child's behavior. Referring back to those 4 functions of behavior, some clients have resistant to demands being placed. They don't want to do certain tasks, mostly because maybe they're too challenging. The way they've been presented in the past have maybe they didn't make sense to them. So it's our job as the therapist to determine how can we teach them, which leads us to those interventions and those strategies. Brittany has 2 different children that I've worked with, and I've had to individualize my approach with both of them. With her oldest son, we used the picture exchange communication system, and he was able to pick up on how to communicate with that quite quickly. Yes. He's able to receptively identify that he wanted a certain snack, and he could give me that picture and I would know what snack he wanted. Versus her youngest child, he has a severe deficit with receptive identification. So he might have wanted a certain snack, but he could not make the connection between an actual, let's say, a goldfish versus a picture of a goldfish. So we had to become very individualized in the way in which we taught the youngest versus her oldest on how to communicate. So picture exchange system was one, versus with her youngest, we relied heavily on leading and guiding us as a process to communicate. So we would allow him to take our hand, and we reinforced his ability to bring us to that item, to exchange that item.
Now he's bringing me to what he wants.
Yes.
Yeah. He will bring, if he loves pancake sausage, it's a frozen food. He will take me to the freezer and get his food. So I love it.
Yeah. So he's come very far in the way that he communicates. Whereas we have to understand that everything is individualized. So teaching what we're talking about right now is a strategy called functional communication training. So functional communication training can be done verbally, it can be done through words, it can be done through sign language, as we talked about, it can be done through picture exchange. So there's an abundance of, there's AAC devices. So some of our clients, one of her sons uses an iPad or is learning how to use an iPad to press a button, and it gives him an actual voice to access wants and needs. So that's functional communication. That is our foundation for teaching at all times, is how to teach this child how to communicate. Upon doing so, upon getting those, that's a proactive strategy. We want to teach them how to communicate so that we can replace those significant challenging behaviors with functional communication to access their world more socially and significantly appropriately. So in addition to functional communication, we have to then identify, of course, during the assessment, we're identifying what gaps does this child have. Often with autism, we have some social deficits where they might not know how to interact with toys. And a big part of being 2, 3, 4, 5 is knowing how to play. They need to contact reinforcement in their environment somehow, some way, and that is often done through play. That can be done through play with parents, caregivers, therapists, and other students, other children. So our strategies are teaching how to use everyday toys, everyday items in their environment, and teaching them how to use them functionally so that they can access social reciprocation with their peers. That way they're not faced with isolation. They're not faced with those feelings of despair when they get older. There's a significant concern for humans with autism as they become older and adults, that they feel those severe isolation feelings, leading to high rates of suicide for children with adults with autism. So we want to make sure that we're being very proactive in teaching them how to access their world and feel as if they belong here as well. In addition to teaching socially significant behaviors, we also want to teach them how to function with independent living skills.
Correct. That is so important.
So independent living skills are something that we have to decide as a therapist. Maybe we need to adjust our approach. And as a therapist, that's something that you have to have that ability to make those tough calls. Whereas with her youngest, we used to focus so much on teaching those basic matching skills until we realized this isn't actually serving him in his life. This isn't actually going to teach him how to contact reinforcement in his life. So we changed our approach with her youngest to where we focus heavily on independent living skills, in the sense that there was a time when he didn't even know how to get an item out of his lunchbox. He was so prompt dependent on his caregivers to provide everything he needed. And he didn't understand that his body was his strength and that he could contact reinforcement himself. So we started with an approach of teaching functional daily living skills with him, such as learning how to unzip his lunchbox, preparing for a transition to school, learning how to hold his backpack. He can now put his backpack on and wear that backpack and walk around like a big boy. He learned how he has a fine motor deficit, but we've learned how to get creative in the way that we prompt him. So prompting strategies are so important in ABA. You have to do a procedure called shaping. So shaping is the process of reinforcing just the slightest approximation towards the end goal. So if the end goal is to open that lunchbox, we would start by just having him just barely pull the end. So where right when he just pulled that zipper right at the end, the lunchbox would immediately open, versus him having to learn how to do the whole thing at once. We just shaped it little by little, where all he had to do was do the very end and he immediately got that lunchbox open. And then we slowly increased the distance of how long he had to unzip. And then we generalized that over to mom, to where at home, she now is able to have him feed him himself with a spoon. He, there was a time when he was like a little bird, and we would have to feed him.
Yes.
Versus now he feeds himself. He can use a spoon, and that's all through the intervention and strategy of shaping behavior. So, starting small. working our way up. So that kind of goes back to what we were discussing with the approach to ABA, is making sure you're not putting too high of an expectation on a child, but instead meeting them where they are at, knowing what they're capable of, and then slowly increasing that expectation and providing a significant amount of reinforcement along the way, so that way they do contact success and that sense of achievement and accomplishment that every human being desires.
Perfectly put across. Thank you so much for this. Over to both of you, for that matter. How do you think how important it is for parents to be involved in this entire process? And how do you build that relationship? Because it needs to be, both-way communication for the child to, show the results. So how much do you think a parent should be involved from your perspective and from yours? So yes, over to you first, ma'am.
I think it's very important because if the parent's not involved, then how do you know what to do at, or out in the community or anywhere for that matter? Like ABA taught me a lot with our parent trainings on what to do at home, how to react in certain manners, and how to just be a better parent to help them and communicate with them the way I should. So parent involvement is very, very big, because if you want what's best for your kiddo, you gotta, in my opinion, be involved.
Yeah, perfect. And how much, so supposedly, Michelle, so how many strategies that you have to do and reinforce at home? How much of a time? Or is it like an ongoing process?
It's an ongoing process. Okay. There's so many different, between both boys, there's so many different strategies that I'm using for both of them. So what I've learned with their time in the center and time in school, there's so many things I'm still using to this day. There's things that I learned from Michelle that pop up into my head. It's like, okay, Michelle taught me how to do this, react this way, and do it this way, and it works out that way. She was great with parent trainings, and she helped me a lot. Like ABA helped a lot.
Fab. So yes, we need to know from you what magic do you work with parents, because you need to, you are the connector.
Yes.
So putting that across correctly and communicating it well is the key.
For sure.
So yes, how do you work that magic?
Yeah, I think first of all, it all comes through connection and building a relationship. So we've been able to work together for almost 3 years now. So over the years, we do want to make sure that we're very open, and that my approach is always to empower the parent and empowers Brittany specifically with reminding her that attending these therapy trainings, attending this and partaking in this therapy is not just to help your child's life, but also to help your life become a lot easier. That was always kind of what I wanted her to understand, was that she's a very selfless mother, and she would always pour herself into her children, but I'm constantly reminding her that you're a person as well.
Correct.
And I want to help you learn these strategies to make your life better, because if you can't pour from an empty cup, essentially.
Perfect.
And so building that relationship in the very beginning, it really helps a parent, I think, trust you and buy into your strategies and want to attend those trainings to, like she said, understand the approach that should be also used at home and in the community. So within parent training, we do talk a lot about their progress. We talk about where they're still struggling, but then we also model a lot with the child. We'll bring the child in the room, and I'll say, hey, let's practice how we're reinforcing hand-holding, going back to that, because that's something we have to keep in mind as safety skills. We don't want a parent to be out in a parking lot and their child take off on them, and something...
Used to happen.
and something very bad could happen. So safety is a priority. I like to prioritize specifically with parents because they are the ones that do take them into the community much more than the therapist. So we work a lot on those strategies, and that's also a way for us to what we call transfer instructional control from myself or the other therapist to the caregiver, meaning that the child will respond as consistently to myself and the parent and not just one or the other. That's the purpose of that caregiver training, is so that the client is consistent, they're receiving consistent care. One of the worst possibilities for a child or any human is that they have one setting where life is set up to lead them into a successful environment, and then they leave that environment and go into another one that is full of chaos, and there's no strategy set up in that home, because then they end up feeling very confused, and maybe they lose their skills in one environment and they're having a very difficult time. And those behaviors may end up coming back, like some of the self-injurious behaviors. You know, a lot of our clients have those behaviors where they might bite themselves, hit their head very hard, you know, do some behaviors that can self-inflict harm, and we never want that to be the case. So consistency across environment is so important for that child to keep them safe and to continue with their success.
Fantastic. So yeah, you mean to say that they need to be ready for all the kind of environments?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And there are many ABA providers who provide therapy across all environments. Her boys are now receiving therapy at school and at home.
Breaks there at home. And then they also have the option to do now in center with their ABA company. So right now it's mostly in school, but for Thanksgiving they're going to be at home doing ABA.
So can you just elaborate, how does the ABA setup work in school?
So both of my boys have an well, right now they share an RBT. She helps them out with school, with transition skills throughout the school, going from like lunch or to specials. She's there helping them with writing, with just standing in line, sitting down, so many different things, and you know, they're useful for in school. And it helps a lot because, especially for my youngest, the first week of him in school, he struggled a bit. And then once she got in there, she started helping, and he's doing great in school. He's sitting, he's walking in line.
Wow.
There's times where he tries to run off, but I mean, a lot of the kids there, they run off.
Yeah, the schools, they're going from primarily receiving care in a therapy setting where they're receiving one-on-one provider treatment for almost 40 hours a week, and then they generalize and transition to the school setting where they're now in a group setting and they don't have that one-on-one care unless they do have an RBT that is able to go with them, which her boys are fortunate to have one. To kind of help with those, keeping them safe. It's a priority for all of us. You know, we hear that term elopement a lot with kids with autism, where they run. Both of your boys are runners. They're both runners. So I'm sure the therapist at the school does a really good job of being proactive in their approach to making sure. That's why teaching that hand holding is important, teaching them how to stand and wait, teaching them how to walk in a line, you know, just expectations, so that when they're in a group setting, if by chance they don't have a one-on-one therapist with them at times, at least we know that they will be safe.
Fantastic. Something new that I'm learning.
Yeah? About the school?
Yeah, about the school.
Oh, okay.
Because, in India, we don't have such an individualized approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the school...
Not yet. We are coming on to that, but not yet.
Yeah, I think ABA in the school is, there's some limitations to it because not every school allows for providers to come.
Correct.
It's based on the principal. So I had to wait for principal approval to have the RBT, and it took a while to get, it took almost a month to get approval.
So your boys go to just a public school in your local area.
Wow, which is nice.
So that's beautiful that she's able to have somebody go, because it's not often that every child gets that opportunity. So it's been a blessing.
A lot of the teachers and parents at the school are like, thank you for having tea with your kid, because they need the help.
Yeah, and that also allows for a collaborative approach with the teacher. So whenever a child transitions from my care to a teacher's care, we generally have a debriefing of our experience with the child, what strategies were successful with this child, so that I can teach the teacher ways to help, because we want the teacher's experience with that child to also be pleasant.
Correct.
And we don't want the teacher to feel like they can't teach this child. So they need to know the ways to be successful and the strategies that we use with them. Just like we would train a parent, we love to collaborate with the teacher as well. It's not just public schools. There are so many private schools, charter schools that a lot of our clients attend, where they're in a much smaller classroom environment, and they do also have therapists that attend there who can help just prompt them along the way to acquire that school and academic content.
Fantastic. Amazing to know this. And all this makes it easier for the teacher, for the child, so the environment is fixed and they can get their potential out. Instead of, looking at the academics, the teachers have to correct their behavior.
Correct.
So at least the teacher now is doing her job, and the RBT is doing their job.
Absolutely. And that was something that we hear a lot from teachers, that they feel like they're just putting out fires all day. And so they're not able to actually teach, and they're not able to, do their job. So having ABA in the school is so important. And I hope that it becomes more, more consistent and more popular across not just our little town, but, the whole, all of the country, everywhere. So
it will sort so many things.
It will tremendous.
Yeah, because the way you're explaining, and when I'm visualizing, it's such a good and a calm atmosphere is what I can visualize, because things are being put into proper place.
Yes. And so that's another, going back to ABA strategies, or what even is ABA. The approach is all about changing the environment to set your child up for success versus changing the child to fit an environment.
Perfect.
So that's kind of where we love having that school approach, because going from this what is considered a very restrictive environment, being in the therapy center all day long with a one-on-one therapist it is a very restrictive environment, meaning they have consistent support, which is beautiful, but we also want that child to eventually be a little bit more independent. That is the goal. At the end of the day, we want you to no longer need us, right?
Perfect.
We want them to be able to be successful, and we can say, we've done our job, look at them thrive. And so by going into that next least restrictive environment, which is typically a school, a special education classroom, they don't get that everyday one-on-one support. They have to do a little bit on their own. Their therapist isn't always there. So they do get the opportunity to show off their skills and to use what they've learned. And then they slowly no longer need that therapist one-on-one. And then maybe they can generalize into or transition into a lesser restrictive environment, such as the general education setting. And they only need a therapist to come in 2 or 3 days a week. So it's all about fading out our services. I wish I could be with them forever. Those are my babies.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful to no longer be needed at the end of the day. Yeah. It is that.
So we have a lot of parents who come in asking that how can they find the right providers and how can they find the right school? So they're struggling with this. So I would really love you to answer this for us, if we can make it a little simpler for them.
So a big part of that is not going to be up to me or anyone else, but Insurance is a big part of it. So first and foremost, you need to familiarize yourself with your insurance provider and who they are able to provide services with. But even more so, once you've limited or you have determined what companies that are going to accept your insurance, from there, it really is important as a parent to tour the facility that you're seeking out and really observe that environment and find, is this environment set up like I think my child will be successful in? What types of therapy are being provided in that environment? Is it just ABA? Do they provide speech therapy? Do they provide occupational therapy? What is the playground like? Is there an area where they can receive the sensory input that we have previously discussed? Do they have a sensory room? You have to know your child and know what environment that they will thrive in. When it comes to the specific provider, so maybe your specific BCBA, this is where advocating for your child is super important. So as a parent, you may be assigned to a BCBA who you find their approach to be an approach that doesn't mesh well with maybe your parenting style. And I think that that's important to know because you don't want to have too much of a conflict of interest or of styles as far as teaching goes. I think over the years you've had multiple providers and I think you've enjoyed working with all of them. But I do think some of them, just like in school, you have different teachers. I think that there are certain personalities or styles of parenting that along the way you find this provider understands my parenting style and or how my child receives affection.
As a parent, don't ever be afraid to speak out. If there's something you don't like about a provider, speak out. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, and that's where it goes back to parent and provider relationship, is making sure you've built that relationship. And if you've not been able to build that relationship, then that is probably a big concern because you do want to have that relationship so that you're on the same page. So seeking out a provider for ABA therapy should always start with your insurance, making sure you find a provider that receives your insurance. But in addition to that, making sure that environment is something that your child will thrive in, asking the right questions, asking about those additional services that are provided there, and then also making sure you build a relationship with that provider and communicating and advocating for your child effectively. So that's on the therapeutic side, but on the school side, that's a different journey. So there are many resources that I know in Florida we have, specifically in Orlando, but the most important part is knowing, do you want to seek out a public school environment or would you like to go more of a private or a charter school environment? And maybe you don't know. So just like you want to tour facilities, you always want to tour the school. You want to ask the right questions. How many students are in that classroom? You want to ask what their curriculum is like. Are they able to receive a high school diploma for that school or maybe just a certification? Is that environment set up with strategies that are going to be able to be used that they used to use in therapy? Will they be willing to use some sort of ABA strategies in the school, or is it a one-size-fits-all approach? How familiar is that teacher with ABA coming from the transition from ABA into school? You do want to make sure you're mimicking somewhat of the same strategies that they were using in ABA in their classroom. Consistency across settings is extremely important. Do they allow in-school providers to come to the school? Is the school safe for that student if you have a runner? Is everything fenced in? Are the doors going to be easily accessible for that child to run out of? These are all the questions that need to be asked from the parents to the teachers. How involved can the parents be at the school? What's the observation process like? Can they come and attend anything at the school? You've had a pretty good environment attending some things at the school.
It's been great.
Yeah, so you did a little walk. What was the walk you did?
Vocabulary parade on Halloween. They dressed up and I got to walk with them, and all the teachers and the parents was involved walking with the kids.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, so school choice is a big, it's just something that as a parent you need to familiarize yourself with knowing what options you have. So yes, so school choice is something, knowing what scholarships are available, because there are many scholarships available to parents. You just got a phenomenal scholarship that you used some of your funds
You
for.
need to then talk about it.
Yeah. So what was the scholarship?
It was either for homeschool or private school, but
Okay.
since I decided to put him into public school, then they kind of
Okay. Well, so that was the Step Up for Students scholarship?
yes, for unique abilities.
Okay.
Unique ability scholarship. He was granted $10,000 to use for homeschooling supplies if I wanted to homeschool him, or I could have put him into private school. And I was going to homeschool him an extra year and wait to put him in school, but I decided to go ahead and put him in school this year. But it's a great scholarship for those who want to homeschool their child or to put them into private school to have more smaller classes, because from my understanding, private school, the classes are smaller. I don't have experience with private school, so I'm not too sure, but that's a great scholarship to look into.
Yeah. And maybe some private schools have smaller classrooms, but a barrier along the way with private schools are because they are most often either not-for-profit or they might be only parent-funded. Out-of-pocket expenses can be very high. So there is a certain type of privilege that might be needed to access schools that are private schools. So scholarships do come in handy, but in addition to that, the barrier is that because the school is so much smaller, they often have a less environment for children with autism. So it is my hopes that over the years, more private schools will expand their knowledge and acquire an ESE, an exceptional student education department, to where the ability for children with autism or other exceptionalities can attend a private school if that is what the parent does choose. Because there are schools now that are just for kids with autism that are considered private schools or exceptionality schools and things like that. But I do think as a provider, it is so important for children to not just be around children with autism.
I just was going to pop this question. How do you think is a better environment? Like children who are on the spectrum to be only with children who are on the spectrum, or be like with all neurodiverse and neurotypicals for them to be exposed to everything?
Yeah, I mean, everybody needs a model, everybody needs a mentor. I have a motto that if you're the best at something, if you're the best in the room, then you're not in the right space anymore.
Correct.
You always need to be advancing.
Correct.
And so with children with autism, once they're in that clinic, that very restrictive environment for so long, they may have reached their potential in that environment because there is no other neurotypical peers who they can be trying to model their behavior. So that going back to play, it's so important for children to be around those neurotypical children so that they can observe how to play, how to interact in that environment. So that's when that least restrictive environment comes into place. You always want to make sure you're advancing that environment and leveling that up a little bit along the way. But that also going to client advocacy and advocacy in general for children with autism, it's so important for neurotypical families to educate themselves on autism, educate themselves on what does autism look like and what is it that we're trying to we want to be inclusive at all times.
Correct.
And so of course, this is a passion of mine. And I know a lot of people are unfamiliar with autism or any other exceptionality. And if you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism. Correct. They're all so individualized and very different. But it is very important for children, neurotypical children, to understand when they are at school, when they're in their community, when they're at the playground, and they see a child who may engage in behaviors that look a little different than theirs, that doesn't mean that they don't want to be involved.
Correct.
And sometimes they just need a little bit of help. They just maybe want you to show them how to do it. Or maybe if you just try and do what they're doing and involve yourself into their world versus always requiring them to be a part of our world. Get involved in their world. You might see the world through a different lens. And,
So true.
And that is what I find the most intriguing about your boys. They've taught me so much about just the way that they contact the environment, through those senses. It's an educational experience that is emotional in and of itself. Yeah.
Great insights that y'all have given. So, to sum it, that one message that you would like to give to the parents.
Message for parents: don't be afraid to speak for your child. Don't be scared. You are your child's biggest advocate.
Wow.
Biggest advocate.
Yeah.
From the day they are born until that's it.
Yeah.
You are their biggest advocate. If you feel something needs to be done, speak on it. If you feel everything's great, still speak on it, because the provider let the provider know they're doing a great job. There's so many times I praised Michelle or even the RBTs, a great job they were doing, because they are very much appreciated, because they choose to go in the ABA. They don't have to be in that job field. So they choose it. So I thank them all the time, because as a single mom of 3 children with autism, it's a lot of work. So.
And you're doing a commendable job.
Yes, you are.
I try.
Yes.
Yes, over to you.
The one message I would give to parents is not to wait. If they have a concern in the very beginning, no matter how early, if something feels off, then to seek out a diagnosis. And if it's not a diagnosis that they're looking for and they just have questions, just to ask the questions. I think that there is a confidence that can come from understanding that a diagnosis of autism is not the end for your child. It's just the beginning. And I think making sure that they really embrace whatever that diagnosis is will help them understand that there are early intervention clinics, there are early intervention therapists out there who we have been consistent in our development of sciences and approaches to ensure that the sooner the better. The sooner the diagnosis, the sooner that you can get into therapy, the better. And to not feel ashamed. Don't feel as if it is this issue that you've caused this to your child, or that, feeling that guilt or that shame, but rather just embrace the diagnosis, embrace the future ahead, find that provider, just dive right in head first. Don't be afraid to share it with whoever you need to share it with, but also don't feel like you need to share it with anyone. Your child may do something different than somebody else's child, but it is not a comparison. Everybody's journey is individuals, as an individual is individualized. And to not feel as if you are doing anything wrong or harmful for your child by seeking out therapy.
Fantastic. It was a pleasure to talk to both of you.
Yeah.
And the kind of insights that you'll have given is really very impactful. Believe me on that.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Pleasure.